Sometimes it takes a while to come up with a good idea for one of these videos. I need to find something that's obscure, but also has enough going on in it that is interesting and worthwhile to talk about. Sometimes, however, you get a game that's so perfect for this that you think God himself dropped it in your lap with a handwritten note and a basket of cookies. In this case, I'm talking about Remember Me, a game that I've wanted to talk about for a while, but this series seems like the best choice because it is the video game naming equivalent of the Titanic, only with more irony and a lot lower body count. Remember Me was the first game developed by Dontnod, a studio you're more likely to associate with the Life is Strange franchise, and was published by Capcom during their weird push for Western developed games. It sold alright, reviewed averagely, and like a good number of games, this title has been consigned to the annals of history. But I still remember. I am the resident gremlin, the purveyor of the retro, the weird, and the forgotten, and today we're running through Remember Me, the easily forgettable video game. We start off with an advert for the Sensation Engine, or Sensen for short, a universally adopted implant that is used to store, transfer, or delete memories and is the game's MacGuffin. We get some lovely testimonials of people sharing experiencing their first dates in tandem, helping them keep the memory of their lost one alive, as well as hiding traumatic moments in their life. As you can guess from the weird little doodad, this is a cyberpunk setting, so obviously we have to show an absolute abuse of it next. So we cut to our protagonist having her memories forcibly removed in prison. This is Nilin, and that's all she remembers, but apparently she shouldn't. So we have the opening credit walk to get brain scrubbed, which was the style at the time. The credit walk, not the other thing. But as she waits patiently in line, a mysterious voice tells her to get ready to run the moment they create a distraction. Nilin then sneaks away and is almost immediately detected by possibly the most unsettling robot in gaming outside of zombie analogues, and we get a quick little chase section which ends with Nilin jumping into a coffin to freedom. This is where the voice introduces himself as Edge, the leader of the Terrorists, a terrorist group bent on taking down Memorize, the company that controls sense and technology. Nilin is a member of the Terrorists, but also a memory hunter, someone who can steal memories from others and has the unique ability to remix memories too, changing how people remember them. And Edge wants to use her to complete their end goal. Now, that was a lot of jargon, however this is a cyberpunk setting, so it's expected, and there's worse to come, I assure you. After the title drop, we end up in the slums and are introduced to the Leapers, people whose abuse of Sensen has somehow left them hideously disfigured, but more believably have this weird cult-like hive mind thing going on, and naturally they are extremely hostile to you. The weird morality of beating up a caricatured leper aside, this is where the game introduces you to combat. But you can't just do combat, oh no, first you have to craft combos using pressins. Pressins are nodes you slot into your combos that you unlock as the game progresses, however you only get the power ones to begin with. Slot your pressins and begin the fight. Combat is a very basic affair with a dedicated dodge and magnetic lock-on, which is extremely reminiscent of the Batman Arkham games, but the combo system adds more of a beat-em-up lean to proceedings, for better or worse. However, we'll get into that when combats get a bit more fleshed out. With the first fight over, Edge tells Nilin to head to Slum 404, because this is a cyberpunk game and we have to have that joke in here somewhere. But to get there you have to do the traversal mechanics, and I'm being very charitable by calling them mechanics. The platforming is extremely on rails, is signposted like crazy, and is almost entirely linear, with the most you have to do is pressing jump at the correct direction. It's kind of like Uncharted without the gunplay. However, it does give you time to take in the game's sweeping vistas, and I've got to say visually it has held up quite well for the most part. Sure, it has the classic 360 era trappings of weird pop-in and a pathological refusal to give people hair longer than a pixie cut, but the aesthetic and the environmental design is honestly still top notch. As we progress, we come across our next new system, the treasure hunt. The game will show you a location nearby and you simply have to find it. When you do, you're rewarded with a part of a stat upgrade, in this case, for health. Getting 3 of these will give you 1 pip of health, similar to pre-reboot God of War. Now, this doesn't sound like much considering they're found almost exclusively through these treasure hunts, but it doesn't have to be because directly after this, you unlock the 5-hit combo, and more importantly, the heal pressin. The heal does exactly what it says on the tin. Landing an attack using this pressin will restore a little bit of health, which kinda removes all challenge from the combat for a good long while thanks to an interesting design quirk of the system. See, to reward longer combos and effectively disincentivize trying to cheese through 3-hit spam, the further through a combo a pressin is, the more powerful its effect. So the power pressin would hit harder and the heal restores more health. Now look at how much a weaker heal restores versus the damage taken by basic enemies on normal difficulty. Just feels like it wasn't tested properly. As you defeat enemies, you gain PMP, or Procedural Mastering Power, which is fancy talk for experience. At specific breakpoints, it would allow you to unlock new presents, but only for a small section based on story progression, in a vain hope to stop you from cheesing the entire game. And a little bit further beyond that, because remember he doesn't like to rest on its laurels, it introduces the first special enemy of the game, the Skinner. Big guy, heavy hitter, but also has the ability to become invulnerable when Leapers are around. It doesn't really make it much harder, but it does unfortunately slow the fights to a crawl until you get longer combos or new moves later on. But after a little bit, we make it to the Leaky Brain and meet up with Tommy, a prominent member of the Errorists. We know this because the game just tells you. Anyway, he's holding onto Lillian's remixer, a memory hunter tool only she can use. But as she's getting changed into her people clothes, she gets jumped by a bounty hunter named Olga, who's after Nillin's bounty. But after a brief scuffle, Nilin hacks into her sensor, and we get to watch what I assume is her most surface level memory. In basic terms, Olga's husband has developed a memory-based illness, likely due to the overuse of his sensen, and is being treated in a memorized facility. But it's expensive, so Olga is taking bounties to pay for the treatment, and you just happen to be the next target on the long list. This is where the game introduces memory remixing, where Nilin can alter how a character remembers a specific event in their life to her own ends. Throughout the memory, there are glitches which can be triggered to change the course of events. Some do nothing unless triggered in a specific order, and some lead to the secret achievement outcome, but the only way to progress is to make the memory play out in one specific way. And for the tutorial, they start you off light by tasking you to make Olga think her husband was killed in front of her. I wish I was joking. You have to make it so the good doctor here blows David's brains out while she watches. What this does in the real world is have Olga remember that she's here to help you get revenge on the people she thinks murdered her husband. And the level ends there, with Olga offering to fly you into Saint Michel. Now, the awkward thing here is that her husband is now condemned to death, or to become a leaper. You'd think the game would explore that moral crisis a bit, and it kinda does? Vaguely? Between each mission, Nilin has this weird Mind Palace narration section where she voices her thoughts and doubts about the preceding mission. In this case, specifically about how this ability of hers is fundamentally terrifying and can be used to play God with people. But she also immediately decides that this is all the more reason to master it and get a better sense of who she really is, which is a somewhat interesting decision to come to, I guess. Mission 2 starts with you dropping into Saint Michel and Ed saying he needs the code from an architect's memory, and that you should meet up with a guy called Bad Request who will show you the way. Again, because cyberpunk. And this area is a stark contrast to the slums. Grimy, makeshift walkways and platforms replaced with clean streets and stone buildings. From people struggling to get by to people wanting for nothing. This is a pretty common trope in, well, everything, but they also handle it a bit better here, with the haves not really being depicted as snooty elitists, and more just people. Willfully ignorant people, to be fair, but not cartoonishly evil. And I've got to hand it to Don't Nod again for not just making everything all shiny and sterile, but instead incorporating more sci-fi aspects into pre-existing old-school architecture. There's even NPCs going about their days and proper window dressing in the storefronts. While yes, it's literally window dressing and there's no mechanical significance, it all comes together and generally adds to the divide. I've said it before and I will most definitely say it again, but the aesthetic design decisions for this is actually brilliant and deserving of praise. But we can't talk about environments forever, and eventually we'll have to get back to combat, and the clean streets get the clean enemies. Instead of the Leapers, we get Saber Force, memorized as Private Police Force, and honestly a rather boring enemy type. It's just dudes in generic sci-fi riot gear with batons, and the worst thing is it isn't much meaningful to differentiate them from what you faced before. Tell a lie though, these enemies can also be taken out with an overload finisher, where Nilin hacks their sensor and likely fries their brains. I'm sure the game will reflect on the moralistic connotations of this. Absolutely. And I'll spoil this right now, it doesn't get much better. Enemy variety is painfully bland, ending up with 3 different types of basic leaper and 4 different colours of enforcer by the end of the game. This, however, is where you're introduced to 2 new tools for your arsenal. Firstly is the Fury S or Super Pressin. which allows you to go into a truly free-flowing combat with a lot more flashy moves and being almost immune to damage for the duration. However, each use of this is governed by focus, this white block that refills when you hit your enemies, and the cooldown of the move, and this is where we get to the second tool, cooldown pressing. I know, it's not very imaginative. Once again, as it says on the tin, cooldown pressings lower the S pressings cooldown on hit, allowing for more frequent usage of them. At this point in the game, you've got more pressings than you can conceivably use, but you probably end up with your 3-hit combo being a dedicated single pressing type, with the 5-hit being more of a hodgepodge multi-purpose thing. Now, this is where the game starts to spice things up a bit when it comes to traversal, by adding hazards. They aren't that hard to avoid, besides repeatedly getting electrocuted. And probably worse, that they can't really kill you, they just knock you down and force you to retreat the obstacle again. Very kid gloves, but you know what I said earlier? And it's almost entirely linear. Well, that's a load bearing almost, because the game does in fact open up the map a bit. Sort of, not really. There are just some minor offshoots from the main path, but they do at least give upgrades or lore tidbits, which are nice, I'll grant you, and are actually very fleshed out world building, but it's a lot of text and you have to stop everything to read it all. A lot of games have this issue and something that seemingly has no solution, but when the only exploration is for stuff most players don't actually care about, no matter how good it is, it kind of feels like a letdown. Anyway, we meet up with Bad Request, and outside of being Nilan's biggest fanboy and having ridiculous hair, what's even going on back here? He also gives you access to Remembrains, arguably the most tedious mechanic of the game. Basically, you follow a ghost of someone's memories to an interactable, wait for them to interact with it, then lock on a mash B or circle. It does, however, let you see the detection codes of these drone enemies, but only when you're in proximity to the memory you're following, which is annoying because these things can and will insta-kill you. It's slow, unintuitive, and feels like it exists primarily to pad the runtime. Outside of the Remembrance, there's not much else going on in the level for a while. Lillian finally asks why they're after the architect's memories, and Edge tells her it's for the secrets of the Saint Michel Dam, and brushes off her further questions with vague innuendo. Climb the building, seal the memory, and head to the roof for extraction. But who is blocking your way but Kid Christmas, ex-memory hunter turned memorizer attack dog. The entire level is plastered with ads for him, his business, and his merch, really hamming up the sellout vibe we're going for. And now, he's after Nilan. Unfortunately, his boss fight is kind of meh when you take into account that A, the game clearly wants you to use Fury, and B, the ramping combo damage means that as soon as you get Fury, you can clear each phase with one rotation. But anyway, first phase is most likely free because you'll have Fury all ready to go from the start. Second phase introduces the Spammer, a weird gun thing that fires data. Cool in concept, but it can be easily dodged. He also gets a lumbering grab attack which couldn't be easily dodged. And in the final, most difficult phase that he calls sudden death, he starts throwing in mines with huge areas of effect that can easily be dodged. Not even joking, if you're even half paying attention, this guy will never hit you. I was quarter paying attention. And as was the style of the time, the fights end with a piss easy QTE, and this is where we fry Kid Christmas's brain on live TV. Nilan might have a problem, but the middling fight to one side, Kid Christmas is a rather interesting character. Not in game, but more the framing of him. See, when the game was in the marketing stages, he was actually pretty decently prominent in the promotional material, even straight up having his own reveal trailer. With how much emphasis was put on him, you'd probably assume he'd be a bigger player in the story, but he's barely there at all. Introduced in Chapter 2, advertised heavily throughout, and then defeated in Chapter 2. After that, he's never mentioned again. Kind of the same as Olga, who seemingly flew out of the story the moment she dropped you off. This game has a real problem with characters that are outside of their one letterbox role in the story. Anyway, beating him lets you the Spammer, which you can use to open and close doors by shooting them. Nifty, but not altogether interesting. What is interesting, however, is that Edge used the secrets that Nilan lifted about the dam to open it up, flooding the comforters and killing, well, the game says dozens, but I'm willing to assume a lot more. This, of course, immediately caused crackdown of Slum 404 and leads Nilan to wonder what the hell Edge is actually doing. and even further to asking why she's listening to him when she could have just left. But then Edge tells her where her memories are kept, and we're right back to listening to Edge. They're in the Bastille, and the only way in that's not through the front door is known only by a mysterious figure called Johnny Greenteeth, and you have to go find him. There isn't actually a lot going on in this mission for like half of it, but we do get introduced quite early on to Scaramex, small insectoid machines dotted around every episode going forward that can be destroyed with the spammer for PMP. However, I'm not entirely sure that makes sense. Firstly, you're shooting data at them, which somehow makes them explode, but they also apparently feed on ambient memory transfers, which is also kinda nonsensical, even in this setting. It smacks heavily of them wanting to add another, more gameplay-centric collectible to the game, but tried to make it a bit too sci-fi. But that PMP is going to be important because the first fight of the level gives you the 6-hit combo, which gives you a little PMP when you complete it. But here's the rub. At this point in the game, you cannot have enough pressings to fill all 3 combos, so you end up having to sack the 5-hit if you want that bonus, which you will if you want to try to keep ahead of the curve. Thankfully, you unlock the last pressing type in the next fight. Combos are self-explanatory, they copy and double the pressing that came before, and this also applies to other combo pressings, making the attack string exponentially more effective. This means heal combos that bring you to full, cooldown combos that recharge abilities near instantly, and power combos that never reach the final hit, which denies you the bonus. Fun. However, this is where the issues with the combo lab become obvious. It's very clearly designed to be used in a way to mix and match pressings, though that, for example, your heal combo has some kick at the end, or you can pepper damaging strings with cooldown. In reality, you'll probably end up with a heal combo, a damage combo, and a cooldown combo to get the most out of them. And this is compounded by the combo being very tempo based, and with hordes of enemies you get interrupted a lot by dudes off screen, meaning that you will want to make the most out of what you can land, hence the specialised strings. I see what they're going for, but the idea doesn't really match the execution. A good bit later we come across a new Leaper type called Stranglers. Yeah, these names are definitely something, but their gimmick is that they can go invisible. The game rationalises this by them manipulating their senses, but I don't think that makes a lot of sense really. However, they are revealed by intense light, which is nice because the arenas all have a big light source you can activate to reveal them. The downside is it's only for 10 seconds, and my god, it just gets frustrating. Thankfully, you quickly unlock the DOS S pressing, which is a big stun move that reveals these enemies, rendering them less of an annoyance for the whole 4 more times you fight them in the game. But eventually you make it back to the leaking brain in the middle of a Leaper invasion. Fight off the hordes and Tommy gives you the Spammer Junk Bolt, which allows you, at full ammo, to damage specifically marked objects in the environment. How you can do this with data blasts is beyond me. Dylan seals the Leaper tunnel before immediately going down a smaller, hidden tunnel that Tommy reveals to you. Say goodbye to Tommy because he is also now gone from the story. Wade through the sewers a bit until Nilin finds an abandoned subway station and a banged up train. It's completely empty outside the last car, which appears to be a medical lab and a home to Johnny Greenteeth, a Leaper that's way more dangerous than the rest you've encountered. He can alter how he looks, go invisible, and shrugs off your spammer bolts. So we run. Trigger the train to start and the Leapers to swarm in. It's a pretty intense fight that has you fight waves of enemies while trying to stop Johnny from getting into the car you're in. It's not a long fight, but at the end you pull the entrance of the Bastille out of Johnny's brain before you crash off the rails. After walking around the tunnels a bit, Dylan ends up in the reservoir basin, and it's a wonderfully fun minefield. You have to follow Johnny's remembrains, and on top of the classic slowness, Johnny teleports, so you kind of have to memorise the path through until you reach the deactivation console, which switches them off. But of course, this leads into a Zorn, one of those really unsettling robots from the start of the game. And unfortunately, this fight is a bit ass because, as the game explains, only the spammer can damage robotic enemies. My general annoyance with the in-world logistics of this aside, it does mean the fight is just backpedaling and waiting as you blow off its arms, blast its chest node thing, and then overload its sensor in a QTE, all before jumping down a manhole to end the mission. But I've really got to question how they fumbled this design. It's a robot that screams with a photorealistic mouth projected from its head and literally taunts you throughout the fight. So it clearly has some intelligence, but the whole fight is just wildly swinging and stomping around like a techno gorilla. And the fact that all you can do is shoot at it kind of takes what could have been a potentially great, even terrifying fight, and made it a joke. The next mission is in La Bastille, the place you escape from at the start of the game. This Mind Palace moment doesn't really have one of Nillen's trademark bouts of conscience, but it does explain the rather ingenious and extremely inhumane way they keep inmates from trying to escape. And also explains the person running the show, lovingly named Madame, is the only one with access to the memories of all the errorists, and you've got to take her out to break them out. The first chunk of the level is just dodging insta-kill drones. Sure, there's a short fight with some stranglers, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense right now, but bear with us. But for the first 10 minutes, it's just waiting for drones to pass. Thank God we get a doodad that reveals the death field, so we don't have to awkwardly follow a membrane anymore. A bit of ducking in and out of prison cells, we end up in an oddly dingy staff area, catching Dr. Quaid, the guy from the memory, chewing out Sergeant Vaughn, a literal piece of garbage. Saying something about needing good quality test subjects and not trauma victims, and that honestly is the first hint outside of the prologue that there might be something insidious going on behind the scenes. Well, outside of the description of Madame and the rest of the mission so far, but you get what I mean. Anyway, Vaughn has the access codes for the prison, so you corner him in the locker room, something he's sort of alluded to being well versed in himself, beat the snot out of him and his guard, and then metaphorically blow his brains out. Of course, this now means you have to follow his remembrance through the doors. You haven't escaped them yet, I'm sorry, it's just going to have to deal with it for a moment. The next fight introduces shield enemies, which can be destroyed with the junk bolt, somehow, but also gives you access to the S-Pressin logic bomb. Stick it to an enemy and after a few seconds it explodes, dealing damage and knocking everyone in the radius flying. Kind of becomes a bread and butter for more crowded fights as the game goes on. Since we've been beating the crap out of the guards, Dylan's cover is blown and Madame, in an attempt to stop the potential riot, activates the Brain Drainer, a cartoonishly massive machine that instantly wipes the memories of anyone caught in its light. And it's about this time I realise Madame has a near limitless budget and most assuredly does not have an oversight committee. Sneak past and we end up in maintenance in time to watch a pair of escaping inmates get blasted by a Seraphim, this weird looking flying robot. As the Zorn fight taught us, robots can only be damaged by the spammer, and that goes doubly for these things because they never stop flying. And honestly, it does give me time to talk about how this, the Junk Bolt and Logic Bomb, seem at odds with the in-world explanation of it's just data, because this is a very physical response to just data. Last time I checked, you could make a person fly across the room by making them think they were. It feels like they kept adding ideas, and rather than trying to rationalize it, they just hand-waved their own internal logic. I'm not kidding, if they had just said this was hard light shenanigans, it would have resolved the problem really easily. Out of maintenance, straight into interrogations, because this place is really weirdly mapped out for some reason, and we find our friend with the ridiculous hair being talked at by Madame. It's the only way I can describe it, because this isn't really an interrogation, she's basically just telling him she'll remix his memory so he's a subservient zombie. Nillen siphons the required memory, which Madame definitely knows you did, by the way, and we head off to the courtyard to fight the last robot enemy type, the Nephilim. Once again, only one move where it slams into the ground, shields itself, and after a brief pause explodes, damaging only you in the area. First one is for the junk bolt, but afterwards the game gives you the S-Preston rust in pieces, or RIP. Word pun aside, it makes the robot enemies fight for you before blowing themselves up. I like this one, it actually works with the data thing. One of only two so far. Mop up the fight and we're back to following Remembrance to the server, but this is where things get a bit weird. Firstly, one of the memories splits into two and goes through different doors, and then we get the Remembrane that has clearly been tampered with, especially when the guards come alive and start attacking you. Simple encounter really, but it has this weird thing where the game tells you unlocked a new combo, but it doesn't appear in the combo lab at all, and I genuinely can't tell if this is a bug or the game just messing with you, because it appears if you check later. Of course, it turns out Madame messed with the Remembrane and starts goading Nillen to come and face her. A little back and forth and we're into a boss fight, and it's kind of disappointing, mostly because it plays so much like almost every other illusionist boss. First phase is simple. Madame will spawn waves of guards which exist only for the purpose of giving you something to charge your focus and cooldowns on. Use DOS to stun Madame, then wail on her. After the first 2 times of doing this, she will begin dropping meteors, which you have to dodge. And whilst the most unique thing in this fight, it just feels like padding because you have to just spam dodge and wait it out, but repeating the DOS cycle. Once you finally reach her second health bar, Madame will stop teleporting around and just float in the air, where you have to junk bolt her. When she lands, she immediately creates clones and you have to find the right one. Except, no, because you can't. Thankfully, she randomly creates a Seraphim and you can use Rip to immediately reveal the real Madame and then slap her until her QTE kicks in. Because of course it does. Sorry, this boss fight feels far too tropey and doesn't really capitalise on the whole Master of the Mind thing. But that's probably because a lot of games did and still do struggle with making this interesting for some reason. Regardless, beating Madame gets you the Force Spammer, which lets you drag objects around. It's not the most interesting thing, and it is really stretching the game's internal logic to its absolute breaking point. We do a quick mini-puzzle and free all the inmates' memories, starting a full-scale riot that the guys are seemingly underprepared for with all their body armour and robots. As for Dylan, she only gets some of her memories back, but amongst them are the reason why she was arrested in the first place. She killed a guy. Well, yes, but actually definitely yes. Into another remix we go, this time Frank Fallen, recently appointed Commander of Sabre. It's the memory of his wife leaving him because he's a drunk asshole, good on her by the way, and Nilan's grand strategy? Make him remember killing his wife. Why are all her remixes like this? Is Nilan a high-functioning psychopath or something? Anyway, remix the memory and it's backed into the cutscene where Frank, thinking that Sabre were here to arrest him for the murder and not take him to his inauguration, offs himself. But it's not really clear why Edge, because it was Edge, ordered this. Because it led to most of the terrorists being rounded up and arrested. Then her mind palace is racked with doubt over all of this. Sure, La Bastille was a hellhole of the highest order and a giant human rights violation, but she killed one guy because she seems to enjoy killing loved ones in other people's memories. Ah well, time to keep following Edge's plans regardless. Granted, this seems like lip service to the moral ambiguity, how one evil can stop another. Nilan even questions it herself, and while it is and the game feels like its message is inconsistent, it does actually make some sense. Think about it. Nilan thought she'd get her memories back after La Bastille, but she still has massive gaps, and Edge seemingly knows everything about her. He's just refusing to share. So the only option she thinks she has is to follow this path to its natural conclusion, which in this case includes remixing Scylla into being not a bad person. It's definitely a strategy. I hope Nilan doesn't kill someone in her memories though. Speaking of, we're halfway through the game at this point, and in that 5 hours we've done memory remixing, arguably the unique selling point of the game, twice. As you can probably guess, remixing, or at least the concept of remixing, was pretty prominent in the game's advertising, so to have done it so little is not a good sign. The game feels more at home with being a generic action-adventure title, as was the norm at the time, than building on what made it actually unique. Back in San Michel, there isn't a huge amount going on other than Edge being vague about how Nil enjoyed the Aerists and waxing lyrical, so we get to talk about the level aesthetic, because this place looks so much worse than the first time we were here. Signs smashed, shops ransacked, streets flooded, all in the name of the revolution, and it being set at night with choppers buzzing around with the searchlights just sells how devastated this place is, and how quickly a peaceful life can be completely upended, especially if you dump an entire lake on someone. We however face an elite enforcer on a corridor, and this enemy is just annoying. Any attack against it deals damage to you, and it's completely immune to DOS, which the game only tells you after you try using DOS. Neat. Now the game wants you to build a regen combo for this, and you absolutely should, but I discovered that, at least on normal difficulty, the return damage literally cannot kill you. So you can just spammer them from afar, build focus from the damage taken, then slap a logic bomb to end the fight. Still an awful enemy design though. A little bit of traversal later and we end up at the VIP door of Memorize, but it's locked and the guy with the code is Captain Trace and you have to find him. Luckily, he rocks up in a gunship and starts chasing them across the rooftops. Now, this section is very reminiscent of something you'd experience in Uncharted, and arguably the only thing separating it from that is that Trace is off his nut and is constantly spouting Little Red Riding Hood while spraying anything that moves.
She's on her way to Grandma's house with a basket full of goodies. There's a big
This is good. This has character. Otherwise, the chase just feels a bit long in the tooth and ends in a short but simple stealth section where you drain his memories and he loses his ability to fly straight. But at least we get this corny line out of Nilin.
This little Red Riding Hood's got a basket. It's full of kick-ass.
Then it's just a simple jaunt back to the VIP entrance where she gets jumped again, this time by reconversion leapers that are also immune to DOS, but ultimately not that threatening. Leaper version 3, by the way. Now here's where the game throws word puzzles at you. The door has a combination lock and Trace's remembrance don't directly tell you the code, but each digit corresponds to his own little mnemonic to help him remember. This is fun. This is better than the code is written somewhere that a lot of games have. And again, this is the most dimension a character has had so far, and it's a crazy guy with a gunship. A bit of stealth through the office, dodging drones and listening to Scylla demand people work through riots after a little flood has devastated the area, and we're in her office to remix her to be not such an evil person, by making the accident her fault. So, this is where things get kind of daft. See, Ed explains that an accident made her this way, and you'd assume that this would be something catastrophic like an industrial accident or something equally as bad. I mean, she literally says,
Crave our trauma white packs more than refugees crave a glass of water.
right? Right. So the accident is that she got in a crash because she wasn't paying attention to the road because her kid was acting up in the back seat. She blames the child, and that's what makes her this.
Fear and discord are on our side. These floods give us the perfect mandate to launch the reconversion project.
It completely crippled her leg, and that somehow explains why she's perfectly fine with turning addicts and victims into slave labour. I'm calling shenanigans, game. Shenanigans. Remix her mind, thankfully not killing anyone this time, and Scylla has a complete 180 in her attitude, greeting her daughter with a heartfelt apology. Oh yeah, kind of important, the memory reveals that Nilin is Scylla and Charles's daughter. Plot implications to follow. Scylla helps her daughter escape, sends all the staff home, and reconsiders the reconversion project. So, good news there. Once more into the Mind Palace thing, and Nilin is understandably thrown by this revelation, and questions whether Edge knew this all along, but still follows him, if somewhat begrudgingly, because the game wants this conflict, but doesn't really know how to keep the story progressing without just saying sod it we ball. But Edge wants to show Nilin how bad things really are, and that we have to save Bad Request, who's still in the prison for some reason. Outside of getting the pick socket, which allows you to take power from one device to put it in another, this mission doesn't have a lot going on, but it gives us time to discuss the characters a bit. Outside of Edge and Nilin, and I do mean that quite loosely, every other character is painfully one-dimensional. All the allies you have seem to exist as only a device to keep the plot moving along, and are discarded immediately after they fulfill their specific function. Tommy just straight up never mentioned after the third mission, and Olga just doesn't do anything major for the rest of the game, which is boring considering she's allegedly a badass bounty hunter. Even Bad Request is the same. He gives access to Remembrance and then spends the rest of the game being a vague reason to come back to La Bastille. And as for the villains, they're just cookie-cutter cyberpunk bad guys. You've got the corporate sellout in Kid Christmas, multiple different flavours of the abuse of power, but they never really develop past that basic template. Case in point, Scylla decides to shut down the reconversion project on the grounds that it's morally repugnant. But Dr. Quaid has decided that he's doing it anyway, because he feels the mad scientist trope, but not in any way that builds on that very basic concept. The only exception is Captain Trace, who, despite having about 5 minutes of screen time, has already shown more developed personality than perhaps pretty much every other character outside the main two. In the room where Quaid declares he's still all for slavery, you find Bad Request's cell just in time for it to be pulled away and the guards to come out to fight. Second Wave gives you access to the fifth and final pression, Sense and Camo. It allows them then to effectively go invisible and then stealth take out one enemy. Essentially, it's an elite killer because the game itself realises how backwards that design is. Afterwards, Edge reveals that Quaid, while originally trying to discover what created Leapers, you and me both, buddy, he soon pivoted to putting an imprint of his mind onto them, basically making an army at his beck and call. Megalomaniacal too, because of course he is. Dylan's locked in now, and Bad has the memories of the lab, so a quick chase section when Dylan catches up to his cell siphons the memories before he's taken to be disposed of, and you have to follow his remembrance to the lab. The lab itself isn't particularly eventful other than watching the remembrance of Quaid torturing bad requests in the name of science. And you basically just have to get the chair to travel to the very start of the game, but all the while, these scandals suspiciously let you through even though Nilin isn't a staff member, same as the door that opened for Dr. Green.
Welcome, Dr. Green.
You catch up with Quaid to take out one of his guards, and the other gets thrown across the room by our old friend Johnny Greenteeth, who is very much not a fan of the good doctor. Another quick fight and the jaunt down the hall we escape down in the prologue, and we're into Quaid's boss fight. Well, not a boss fight, but an enemy gauntlet where Quaid just stands around in the viewing area, spouting his vision for a future where humanity is a hive mind consciousness, which is a little more interesting than ruling the world. Still megalomaniacal though. Which obviously means that after the fight is over and he's tried dropping you down a disposal chute, he comes over to gloat, only for Johnny to apparate out of nowhere and kick him down the hole himself. Climb down the hole, find Bad Request who hasn't been disposed of and is free of Quaid's implanted thoughts because he linked it directly to himself being alive with absolutely no backup plan, just in time for Mr. Greenteeth to show up. Turns out he's Dr. Green and he was one of the first victims of Quaid's experiments, and is awfully coherent for a leaper, and would be a pretty compelling character if the game gave him time to be anything more than a boogeyman. As it stands though, he still remembers the self-destruct codes and plans to destroy the entire facility, Nilin and him included. Not sure what issue he has with Nilin exactly, but hey. The fight itself is basically a standard enemy encounter. Spawns a bunch of leapers and teleports around, and you have to stun him to deal damage. However, he doesn't have a boss health bar for some weird reason, so all you need is a power combo with a bunch of combos in it, and you can easily two-cycle him. Still entered a QTE, one where Johnny beats the crap out of Nilin before Bad saves her and ultimately dies. Fry Johnny's brain and escape the labs in the coffin, referencing the beginning of the game, which would be a nice place to end everything if there wasn't 2 levels left. Once more into the Mind Palace, and Nilin is actually confident for once. She wants to see this through to the end and won't let anyone stand in her way. I like confident Nilin. It took far too long to get to her though. Mission starts with Olga dropping you off in a big fancy tower before completely leaving the story altogether. Trace has the key to the Conception Cube, the weird tech doohickey Charles has been hauled up in all this time, with the cause of everything. But he's not doing so hot after Nilin stole his memories earlier, and is basically going Leaper. But you have to get his memories again, so he just runs. This being the penultimate mission, or at least the last full chapter of the game, it's basically a greatest hits of everything the game has to offer. A few puzzles here and there, the second and only other Zorn fight which is identical to the first, and a whole bunch of fighting, so it gives us time to discuss the plot. See, on the face of it, tropiness aside, the story isn't bad. Sure, it's generic, but it does touch on a few pretty interesting topics. The dangers of unchecked power, how one traumatic event can change a person, how dwelling in the past can be equally as bad as forgetting it altogether. The issue is that it only looks at these on a very surface level, never really going deeper than just saying this is bad. Which is especially annoying because it's sat there with a main character with the ability to rewrite someone's entire personality and only ever shows the barest mental and emotional turmoil during the interludes between the episodes. Especially when the rest of the game is just spent frying people's brains and beating up on essentially drug addicts. There is some serious ludo-narrative dissonance going on here, but the game doesn't seem all that interested in unpacking any of it, and ultimately this makes the game seem to lack any real direction to its narrative. Another issue is Nilin herself for 2 major reasons. First, she doesn't feel like she has any actual agency in the story. Everything plays out to push Nilin along without much actual input from her end. Legitimately, most of what she does is because Edge tells her to, and that's because she really doesn't have a choice in the matter on account of the amnesiac thing. And even beyond that, the game holds the twist of her lineage way too close to the chest. Nilin is the daughter of the 2 most powerful people in Paris, and at no point does anyone make an allusion to the fact that she is. Not Kid Christmas, not Madame, not even her own mother until she actually sees Nilin again. And it's not like she's laying low, what with her being public enemy number 1 and a fugitive on the lam. No hints, no foreshadowing, and the plot twist just falls flat as a result. But back to the game, we catch up to Trace just as 2 mourners throw him and themselves off a balcony, stealing his memories, and you have to get them back. But to do that you need to scan Trace for some reason, and this will show you just how on rails the traversal is. At this point, I have enough health to survive the fall from the balcony. However, the game decides that the floor is lava because it didn't hit the trigger that makes you fall anyway. Just a small gripe, but a gripe nonetheless. Getting the memories back isn't that hard, you just have to fight the mourners in a crowd of enemies. However, it is literally just the Johnny Green Tea fight doubled up with no new gimmicks. By the way, this is also the last time you ever encounter mourners. It's not much to write home about, but it seems like a waste of opportunity. A quick jaunt down the corridor and past the last insta-kill drones of the game, thank God, and we're into another puzzle room. And the actual puzzles in this game are weirdly good. They aren't all that hard, the difficulty mostly comes from you overthinking it. Me overthinking it. But it's honestly one of the most unique aspects of the experience, and like every other unique aspect of this game, I wish there was more of it. Complete the puzzles, which opens up the way to the Conception Cube, then you have to fight your way down to it. But unlike the other fights where it's an awkward slog of enemies, this series of fights actually makes you feel powerful. Partly because the enemy combination lets you make full use of the S presence, but the swelling orchestral music accompanying it. That and the tunnel to the cube is just that right balance of orange glowiness and futuristic angles to make it feel climactic. But we still have one mission left, to force Charles to face the world he's created, and more specifically destroy the memorized central server, H3O. Off the bat, the Conception Cube has a really cool aesthetic. It's this weirdly perfect fusion of classical architecture and futuristic design, which perfectly captures the kind of man sat in the room below. Charles Cartier-Wells, a genius that dreams of a better future but perpetually is stuck in the past. Specifically, Nillen's past. As Edge puts it, he's depressed and is trying to find solace in the days where he and his family were happy. It's also driving him kinda crazy. And you know the kicker? He designed the memory transfer technology for Nillen to help her forget the crash and live a normal, happy childhood. So all of this, the abuse of power, the leapers, everything, stems from the best intentions. But now Nillen needs to get him to shut it all down. And that means remixing. And this memory is of the first ever remix of Nillen having her childhood nightmare stripped away, and Charles' desire to do the same for his wife, and then the whole world. So obviously the best way to get him to change his mind is... Should have seen this coming, honestly. 3 out of 4 on this. Now, I haven't shown the components of the solution of any of these before, but this one, messed up as it may be, is actually inspired. They're in a lab with no dangerous implements or machinery, so what you actually have to do is jump into the remix Charles is doing during the remix. I unironically love this because it's so obvious but also so goddamned cool. So Charles does the remix, and then you have to rewrite his remix so Nillen dies in the memory, and because the child remembers dying... I'm not showing this, it's not fun to look at, but it's a bloody powerful image. And then Nillen finally breaks the man by turning up in front of him, showing him how dangerous what he's created actually is. Then his wife comes in and berates him for everything, but says that they can fix this. And I feel like the cutscene does it more justice.
There's a civil war out there, Charles. Hate, fear, riots, pain. Everything you set out to eliminate. It's our fault, Charles, and it has to stop.
We're nearly there.
We must cut the flux relay at its source. Disconnect H3O.
The security system is impossible to breach. Unless...
It is time.
Unless both you and I authorize access. Together.
Et voila!
That's why you sent me to remix them. Only they could authorize access to the central server.
Now it's your turn, sis, to finish the job.
They open the door to the servers and leave Nillen to finish the rest. And it's a great scene. It's emotional, but also hits that crescendo of the plot finally coming together, helped a lot by Edge just going off throughout. But in the elevator before the servers, the game casually drops that this has all happened in the space of a day. Now, it's neither here nor there in the grand scheme of things, but I'm not really sure how you break out of La Bastille, flood a district, then break back into La Bastille twice in the space of a day. Nillen is one hell of an overachiever to do decades worth of work in 24 hours. Either way, Edge gets cut off when explaining how to shut down H3O, and leaving Nillen following her own remembrance through an ever-shifting labyrinth of decrepit and corrupted server banks. Then Edge comes back, saying he'd forgotten how sad Nillen's childhood memories were because it's been so long since he last relived them. before urging Nilin, his little sister, forward. And at the very end, we find Edge, or more specifically H3O. See, he is an AI that was created by the horrible memories people dumped into the servers. And suddenly, everything makes sense. How he knew so much about Nilin, about La Bastille, about Memorize and Johnny Greenteeth and Quaid's experiments, about how to get into the Conception Cube or how to access the servers, and about why he's single-mindedly focusing on taking the whole thing down. He's a construct of humanity's worst memories and emotions, and he wants to end it all. And this is an amazing twist, because unlike Nilin's lineage, it is subtly hinted at throughout the entire game, but never in a way that shows its hand. The writing is on the wall for people that are looking for it, but only if you know it's there. I'd go so far to say it's one of the best twists I've ever experienced in a video game. It's so beautifully done that it's almost worth sitting through the rest of the game for it. Edge then gives Nilin no choice but to try shutting him down, so she jacks into the server and... it's a giant boss fight. Well, game, you almost stuck the landing. It's essentially a three-phase puzzle boss where the solution is the same each time. So instead of that, let's talk about my overall thoughts on Remember Me. It may seem that I have been very negative about this game, and that is entirely because I have been. I have long held that a mediocre or average game is worse than a bad one, and Remember Me is most definitely average. The combat is serviceable, simultaneously trying to be free-flowing like the Arkham titles, but also combo-centric, but fails to match the expectations you'd have for either. The traversal is just more on-rails Uncharted with set pieces to boot, but feels like something they were required to add rather than something they wanted. The story, while bringing up potentially thought-provoking topics and having one of the best twists ever, is as shallow as a puddle and ends up being cookie-cutter cyberpunk. And what's worse is that the unique things it did, specifically the remixing, are super underutilized. In the entire runtime, you do 4 remixes. 4 in an average of 10 hours of gameplay. If I'm honest, the game would probably have been better or been more well received if it was any other genre, but unfortunately it released in the early 2010s and everything had to be an action platformer. And in the end, it feels like a greatest hits compilation performed by your local cover band. Back to the fight, and it doesn't end with a QTE, but a little cutscene of H3O once again asking Nilin to finish the job, before being destroyed and all the memories getting returned to everyone. And then the game ends with Nilin having a retrospective that experiences, good or bad, shape who you are, and that tampering with them is very dangerous and bad. But it also says that she can learn everything about someone and make them believe what she wants. And this, quite frankly, puts a nail in the coffin of the game's ethical discussion. The entire game is spent outlining how much damage this technology has done to the world, and concludes with it's bad and shouldn't exist, then immediately 180s by basically saying, but Nilin can still use it because she's the hero. 75% of her remixes in the game were death-related trauma, and even beyond that, you can't treat her as an exception just because she's not mustache-twirlingly evil. Unless, of course, that's what they were going to try exploring in the sequel that never got off the ground. It was a clear pass, a shot on goal, and then they booted it into the stratosphere. And that's Remember Me, a game I'm sure you'll all forget about the moment you start watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments if you played the game and how you found it if you remember. I have been the Resident Gremlin, and I'll see you next time.